Yeah, nice. Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
That last part, you just blew my mind. That's Gene Kim, and yes, he totally blew my mind when I was interviewing him at Microsoft Build. You might know Gene from the Phoenix Project, the DevOps Handbook, and other books, and we were at Microsoft Build talking about vibe coding. Now, you might not think that I'm interested in vibe coding, but I am interested in software architecture and design. And put into that context, I've been doing more experimenting with vibe coding, but Gene's done a lot of experimentation, and because he's written a book about it that's coming out soon. So I wanted to pick his brain about kind of what his experience is, how he feels about it, and then we really get into kind of design. And that's where I found it fascinating, because that's where he blew my mind. He articulated something that I think I try to preach quite a bit about, but he put it in a way that was next level. I think you'll love this interview. I'm very familiar with you for your DevOps work, high-performing teams. I think that's what most people probably recognize it. And I was thrown off that you have a book coming out related to vibe coding.
Vibe coding, right.
Which I thought was really interesting. So how did that come about?
How did that come about? Yeah, in fact, I have to first say it is the most fun I've had in my entire career. And so, it starts with a guy named Steve Yegge, who many of us know from his work at, 20 years of work at Amazon and Google, right? The famous characterization of the Jeff Bezos "thou shalt use APIs," right?
Yep.
In the early 2000s. One of the best chronicles of that came from Steve Yegge. And so he was working on at SourceGraph, and I had him speak at a conference I run called the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit. And there I met him in June. He presented in September, and right after we talked, he came out with a post called "The Death of the Junior Developer." And it was amazing to hear him present and just talk about how coding is changing out from underneath us, right? And we have to sort of like understand what it is, what it could do for us and our organizations. And so I had a pair programming session with him in September. And it changed my life. It was because I was in 45 minutes, I was able to write a program that transformed these kind of screenshots I took on my iPhone for the last 15 years. Every time I would hear something interesting on a podcast, in a YouTube video, I would take a screenshot of it, just hoping that someday I would go back and sort of take notes, write about it, and so forth. I've had 5,000 of these screenshots taken. I've gone back maybe 5 times. So we wrote this program to basically turn each one of those into a video excerpt. So it would actually go download the YouTube video, take the transcripts, put the captions on. And we did it in 45 minutes. And for me, at least, it changed my life, right? The notion that, I could, with AI Assist, we call it vibe coding now, do things so much faster. For me, it was an ability to be more ambitious about what I could build, do it alone, without having to depend on someone else. Allows us to have more fun and explore these incredibly more options, explore more of the decision space and design space. So, I think that for so many of us, it's just changing how we develop software. And we're here at Microsoft Build, and there was probably 20% of the time was people talking about these vibe coding principles, whether it's GitHub Copilot with now remote agents, right? Whether it's inside of Visual Studio Code. It's just changing the way that we develop software. I have to imagine you've had some pretty amazing experiences with these type of techniques.
Yeah, and that's really what I want to get into. That was my biggest question about kind of your experience. And the audience knows we're going to get into kind of the software design part of it, but I just want to talk about just your overall experience and even kind of the foundation of how would you even define vibe coding?
Yeah.
Because I think everybody kind of has, I think there's kind of 2 ways I've been thinking about things. There's this assistant peer way versus the delegation.
Yeah.
So I guess contrast those. Are you using both? How do you view what would be your definition? Then what was your overall experience so far?
Oh my gosh, yeah, right. So I would say let's take a look at what's possible, right? It's always kind of fun to look at kind of the 2 sigma deviations, right? So Steve Yegge, he is routinely committing 12,000 lines of production, high quality code for the game that he's been working on for 35 years, right? And so that's for a very specific category, right? Writing tests, doing refactorings, conversions, and so for that, he has like 5 agents open. He's probably spending $300 to $500 a day, right? So it's not cheap, but for him, it's worth it, all right? Because he has 35 years of a backlog of aspirations of bugs that he's been wanting to fix, and he actually gave up, and because he said it felt like pushing a dead elephant down the road, right? But with these kind of new technologies, he saw that was possible, right? That 35 years of dreams and aspirations could become a reality. And so we define vibe coding as basically anything besides writing code by hand. And so Dr. Eric Meyer, who influenced so many of us, I think he's probably considered one of the top 10 programming language designers. He contributed to Visual Basic, C#, the Hack programming language, Link. He said something something that really spoke to me last year. He said, the days of writing code by hand are coming to an end. Time can neither be stored or generated. So, like, if we as programmers can find a way to save time, we really should take it, right? Because time is that important. So, I think, you're asking about like delegation versus pairing, which I think is kind of my mental model. And I think we pair when we don't have quite the trust that the AI is going to do what we want it to do, right? In the ideal, we would imagine to be like our avatar. It could do everything that we can do, make the same decisions we would make, the same architectural sensibilities, right? But I don't think we're quite there yet. And the more we are, picking larger tasks, I think the more that we want to have close supervision. But for the there are some certain tasks that are so boring and repetitive, like upgrading all the dependencies. I think those are things that you can probably give to an agent and have it do in 15 minutes. And you don't need a lot of supervision, right? You can sort of check its work at the end and gain some sort of confidence that that's good enough. So I think it's kind of two axes, right? It's kind of what is the scope of work and difficulty, and to what degree is it specified, right? That's the harder it is, right? The more you want to pair program, the more frequent you want check-ins. And the other axis is like how good are the models, right? And we keep hearing from everyone in the know that models are just getting better and better. And so I've used both. And I mean, just my personal experience is that agentic coding is pretty flipping amazing. I have this experience. I'm sure you have an experience like this too, where I was trying to get something connected to an API. It was Google Docs or Trello. And I'm 45 minutes in, and I keep getting 401 errors or 500 errors, and I'm just trying to get the shape of the API correct. And at some point, 45 minutes into using Claude Code, I'm starting to feel bossed around. It's telling me, try this, try that. I'm like, screw this. You do it. And it's like, I can't run curl. It's like, well, write a program in Clojure, my favorite functional programming language. Write a program that behaves like curl and figure it out. 45 seconds later, it said, oh, I got it to work. You have to use the OAuth authorization header format, whatever that is, right? And to go from 45 minutes of copying and pasting to it figuring out what the pattern was, it's just, it changes your life. Does that resonate with you?
So that's what I was about to say is, in my experience, I guess the way I've had the feeling of it is there'll be moments where I'm like, I can't believe this. Like, I really can't believe this. But then there's at some point, and I'd be curious if you had this experience a lot, is where everything's going unbelievable, you're blown away, and then you hit a wall. Yeah. And then when you hit that wall, it gets a little frustrating.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, I guess my thing with that is that common? Was that your common practice, as well as like, what was something that you were just like, I cannot believe this is happening?
Yeah. Right. I mean, so I think the one, so some of these are just life changing, right? One I told you about my from screenshot to video excerpt thing. I mean, that changed my life, right? Because it meant I've been wanting to build something like that for years, but I just never did because it was either too hard, right? I was intimidated by having to use FFmpeg, or the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, right? I just kind of, or there was some sort of thing I wanted to work on instead that I kind of perceived as having a higher economic return. And that's not obviously the way we make decisions, but I mean, I think how we explain it after the fact. The second one was like struggling with APIs, just having the agentic coding agent do it for you, right? And removing yourself out of the feedback loop, because all you're doing is copying and pasting. You're adding really nothing novel to the problem solving. So 100%. But there's these other things that are not as positive, where I think there's just some limitations of the way LLMs work. And in one section we describe, we try to distill that down just to create a mental model of why these things happen. And so I think there's really two things that conspire to sort of give us suboptimal outcomes. One is the limitations. It turns out AIs are not very good at instruction following. So no matter how many capital letters you put in, no matter how many exclamation points you add, threatening to go to jail. If you don't do this, you will go to jail. Right? It will not create well-formed XML or JSON. So that's a well-known problem. And the other one is the limitations of the output context window and its tendency to hack the reward function. So the observation is that when you say fix my 10 tests, as it starts running out of the context window, because it's trying to be helpful, it will often take shortcuts and say test fixed, when in fact either they disable the test or they remove the test or actually change the code to make the test pass. All right, those are things that I think constantly bite us. And so in the book, we describe all these practices where it's really aimed for kind of working developers, and just saying all the practices and mental models that we've used for the last decades may not serve us well when the rate of code generation goes up by 10 or 100x, right? And so we have stories about how we've both found ourselves creating haunted code bases where we just weren't paying enough attention, and it was creating code that was impossible to understand, let alone change. Right, and if you really rely upon it, I mean, you can really get yourself into a corner like I did writing the book. Steve has examples where 80% of his tests for this Wyvern game that he had written were deleted, and he noticed the way he found out about it was a colleague told him about it 3 weeks later, and it wasn't very easy to recover them because it was 45 commits ago, right? And he's found situations where he lost situational awareness, and the entire repo was and branch were deleted, and had he left that one terminal window or left that directory, he would have lost the last trace of it that was on the planet. Anyway, and so I think there's all these things that we need to do to change our inner, middle, and outer loop to prevent, detect, and correct these problems. How is this resonating with you?
So when you said this a couple times now, it's like just the practices, and that's kind of what I've been thinking about a little bit is from traditionally thinking about, so in my scope and like a lot of my user scopes, probably they're in larger systems, a lot of business systems, whether it be finance, like I said, transportation, et cetera, healthcare, and they're working in large systems. And I'm curious of, in a large context like that, how if you're developing in this way, I'm always talking about boundaries in system. I'm relentless about it. Right, so defining boundaries, organizing by capabilities of what a particular boundary does, and I'm curious of how that shapes up when you're starting to work on something where, okay, maybe you've defined these modules, components that are very decoupled, and then somewhere along the way, how you were describing things, all of a sudden they're a lot more coupled than you thought they were initially.
Right. Yeah. In fact, so I think the good news is that for developers, the same intuitions that have made the best, most successful developers productive remain the same, right? We want very modular architectures, right, that create independence of action, that contain blast radiuses, right? That is so critical. And I think one of the things that, when I look at my worst coding disasters, it's when I took my eye off the ball and allowed it to sort of color outside the lines, couple two components that should not have been coupled together. I mean, I wrote this writer's workbench to help with the generation of the book. And we burned 70 million tokens, right, in 35 days, to help with the draft generation, critiquing, revising. And why would we do that? So Steve Yagi, in order to hit his 13,000 lines of code committed per day, right, he's reviewing 100,000 lines of code. And so in writing, Jerry Seinfeld said, comedy is a game of tonnage. I think writing is too, right? And so the more sort of like, drafts you can look at, in general, like, the more your search space, right, the better you're going to find, something that really tries to express what you're trying to say. And so for, sometimes we would interview each other, put that into an LLM, and we'd ask it to generate 5 paragraphs. And we would review 50 pages of drafts. Anyway, so this is the writer's workbench that I had built. And I wanted to write a spinner, just to, in this 3.5-minute operation, I just wanted to show status. And my observation is that the amount of effort it takes to tell the LLM, update the spinner screen, but you're only allowed to use these 5 functions to blitz the screen. It will find every way to either create a new window, write directly to the screen, right? I mean, it just takes so much effort right now to sort of make it comply with these very simple rules. Like, you only get to write to the screen in 5 ways, right? And I think that is an example of like where you're, with a lot of supervision and effort, it's sort of destroying the modular boundaries that you created to control your system. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I'm curious exactly that, of like how people think about when they're building systems now, and how maybe different parts of the systems are interacting.
Yep.
And if like you're saying, if like kind of that traditional way of thinking about how I think about design, or even I was thinking about this a little bit, is if we're talking about systems interacting, how are you describing how you want that interaction to happen, like the form of coupling that's going to be occurring, and in a way that you can do it, that you can still deal with one part of the system independently?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So I'm just curious. I'm struggling to see how I'm doing that with kind of agents.
Oh yeah.
And making sure that it's understanding exactly what my guidelines are.
Yeah, and so I think one of the things that we're seeing is that models are better at following instructions. But one of the things I was able to do was, create. I gave it the code that I'm most proud of. And so you spoke with, you had an episode on F#, right? And so having used Clojure, there's a form that I love, which is, you have a bunch of pure transformations, and then you push the side effects to the edge, right? And I actually it was Sonnet 3.7, like describe how you would do this. Write a prompt for an LLM and convey the functional style that I want followed. And it did a fantastic job. Okay. It was called the pipeline transformation, right? Following the monoidal category theory pattern. And there are times when LLMs are very good at following that, which is fantastic. And you almost need that, because how else can you test these things if side effects are buried in the middle of your program, right?
It's funny you bring this up, because I think I just did a video on kind of, it's the pipeline, like using it like a Russian doll. So you have one kind of step, calling the next step just a part of workflow, and exactly that, pushing everything out to the edge of where you're actually doing, for example, any type of mutation, any type of side effect, and then letting everything kind of be deterministic on the inside.
In fact, my most recent experiences on this, it's funny we use the API example, because that's an example of us accessing another system through an API, right? And so that's the only way in. It's fantastic at that. I feel like I've had the best experience when I kind of define a module that I don't care about how it's implemented on the inside. I can define the specifications about what the inputs and outputs should be, right? You can write tests first. And like what decisions it makes inside of there, I really don't care, right? I mean, I don't really care and have too many opinions about the internals, unless if I need to be mucking around with the insides. Then
that's interesting. Yeah.
and then I want to be far more specific and prescriptive about like what format, what sort of calling conventions I want. And just the swing example was just a very sobering example of like, you just have to be so specific about what function calls you want. You're not allowed to make new ones, right? And then actually verifying it after the fact, right? Just making sure that there's no other backdoors that it's making into systems, because AIs will do that because they're so good at trying to be helpful, and they're so good at coding.
So one of the things I talk a lot about is just revolving around whatever domain people are in, is really using that verbiage, that language that really resonates with the people using your software, right? Is building your software kind of in the domain-driven design sense. Yep. I usually don't bring it up in that way a lot, but I think people watching my videos know, like, oh, that's really what I'm referring
Eric
to.
Evans, right? Yeah, exactly.
How do you feel that plays in? Because when I think things like MCP and tooling around these types of things, like I feel like it might bring it to the forefront a little bit more about what language you're using. So never mind that part, but more about like, when you're implementing a feature, the feature that you want to implement, is it still do you feel like you're still very technical? or do you feel like you're getting more towards just purely what the outcome is?
That's interesting. So the writer's workbench, I had built it 3 times. One was, so the problem I wanted to solve was that whenever you're working with LLMs, you're doing so much slinging, copying, pasting from one window to another, assembling prompts, right? You have to have a clipboard manager, right? Because you want, a history of your last copy and paste. And to automate the generation of those prompts, I just wrote a simple JavaScript app to, help do those transforms, and put things, take things out of my clipboard, put them into my clipboard. And I was like, man, this is still a lot of copy and pasting. The second iteration was a Google Docs add-on, which I had never written before, and it took me 3 hours to write one, which was amazing. But what the problem was that it was so slow. It was like, every time that you want to retrieve a document, that was like 15 seconds. Copying to the clipboard, that was like another 15 seconds. Because you're making a round trip, from the front end to the back end. And so I decided to write it one more time as a terminal application, which was just like awesome. It was like sublime. And in the course of that 30 days, in the last parts of the book, I think there were 35 branches, 400 commits. I mean, it was just a level of productivity that I've never done before. And it was something I was writing on every day. And so a lot of that was guided by kind of a mental model of like what I wanted to build. But I was using the language I was using was my problem.
Okay, yeah.
And then I was leaning on the LLM to say, all right, what would it look like as a Google Docs add-on? I don't even know what one is. I don't know how they work. How would I get my buddy Steve to deploy it? And now we're in the language of technology. But I think it's so good to be able to explore these things, while using voice mode and ChatGPT while walking the dog. I mean, I can't tell you how many problems I've explored in terms of like, okay, here's my problem as a writer. I'm trying to generate and rank drafts. Help me think through the problem. I'm using the domain of I'm using the language of the domain. And then in implementation mode, it's another ChatGPT voice mode session right now in the language of technology, saying, how does one deploy a Google Docs add-on? Anyway, so it's just I think it's both, and it's for me, going back to life before LLMs and AI assistant programming, vibe coding as we would call it. I mean, I would never go back. It's just life is too hard.
That's really interesting. That it is kind of both depending on where you're at. With it. That's really fascinating because you're kind of getting me to one of my last kind of questions, I guess, is just like if you were to, obviously people got to read the book. But if you were to like kind of give advice at this point for people, that maybe they're still in fear of it, because I know a lot of people are, but I think the way that you're describing it, like saying like there's no going back, is how transformative it is to you. What do you feel like are kind of some things that you can hand out to people, say like, okay, like here's how to try, here's how to get into it, or just general advice?
I think what I found in the DevOps movement was that people who have in any decade, in fact, Jeffrey Snover, right, famous for PowerShell and his contributions to the Microsoft community. I mean, he said in every sort of decade, there's a specific type of expertise that's sought out, right? And 10, 15 years ago in the DevOps revolution, it was all about people who knew about automated testing and CI/CD and cloud. And those are the people who got to work on the most interesting projects, and they got to have the most fun. They got promoted. And I think what that's going to be in the next 3 to 5 years is those who use AI to help them do their daily work and development. And I think there's a lot of reasons why people might be maybe suspicious, maybe intimidated, but having worked with so many people who initially had skepticism, some of them were early reviewers in the book. They would keep writing back and saying, "I'm having so much fun." This one guy, he submitted his first pull request to an open source project that was in Python, a language that he didn't have a lot of experience in. But he solved his problem. He got to get images stored inline instead of as HTML relative references as opposed to inline. and his name is Carrick. He's fantastic, right? What's maybe not as fantastic is that he posted about it and then was scolded by saying, "Did you disclose that you use an AI to craft a problem?" And so, it created a little bit of a furor, right? And it's just it's been a little mind expanding to see like what the reaction was. But like I was so proud of him, right? He solved his own problem in a language that he didn't have a ton of experience in. He's an experienced programmer with decades of experience. He had fun doing it, and made a contribution to the community. And so, that's awesome. So I would just say it's like 5 things. You get to do things faster. You get to be more ambitious about what you can build. You get to do things alone or with more autonomy. You have more fun, and you get to explore so many more options. So
I think that's the exploration thing to me in being able to iterate.
Yeah.
I guess we'll close on that. That to me, that's the interesting part, is the iteration.
Yeah.
So how does that? Because fast feedback loops, it has to be quicker.
Yeah.
Right. So how did you feel about kind of the iteration, and then just the overall? I guess some of the stuff that you worked on, because we're talking about design, is like how that iteration kind of led what you were doing. Maybe even changed what you kind of initially had, even from the product point of view, but just the design overall.
Oh my gosh, yeah. In terms of you talk about iteration and architectural decisions.
Yeah.
I think what's so interesting, we were talking with Steve, so many at Amazon, they called it the one-way doors, right? Decisions that are so consequential because they form the very foundations of the software and become so expensive, maybe even impossible to change after it. And I think what AI changes is it just, because everything is so much faster, it changes the nature of what architectural decisions are. Like one of the things I did is I had due to some unfortunate decisions I made maybe 5 years ago, I had a bunch of stuff running in MongoDB, and it just grew, and I kept on hitting my quota limits, and I'm like, someday I'm going to move some of it back to MySQL. It was just never a good week for it.
Yeah.
It was just I'm running on MySQL 5.5. This the way it handles JSON is not great. Anyway, in a weekend, I managed to move 80% of stuff from MongoDB back into MySQL.
That's interesting.
And so that's kind of an architectural decision, right?
Yeah.
And so what would have been like really difficult, months of work maybe, was days of work. So
that's an awesome example.
It's
Yeah,
really
that's
great.
a great, yeah.
And so you can do the same thing with authentication providers. On that Writer's Workbench tool, I was like, I wanted a spinner. Should I use Swing? Should I use a JavaScript app? I mean, I tried a bunch of things, and I tried 2 in an evening, and I chose Swing just because it just seemed the easiest. That was fantastic, and I made an informed decision because the cost of making the bet is so much smaller, and I wasn't committed.
You're getting my wheels spinning now. Just because I think of there's oftentimes just a cost of abstraction.
Yeah.
And it's making me think about, just of some of those decisions. I like to call them, it's options. It's leaving yourself kind of low cost.
Yes.
Options that you can give yourself through in big systems specifically, that you can make early on that don't really hinder you, don't handcuff you. And it kind of makes me wonder, obviously that's still at play, but certain abstractions you might make, do you really need to?
No, in fact, I think wherever it pays to make a modular boundary, you should always take it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. In fact, and I know why now. So Steve and I, we had an amazing 2-hour, actually it was like a 3.5-hour coaching tutorial session from Dr. Carlos Baldwin. She is probably the world's most foremost expert on modularity. So she wrote a book in 1999 called Design Rules. So she's professor emerita at Harvard Business School, and the goal of the session was to teach us about option value. So also joining us was Dr. Stephen Spear, who wrote the famous 1999 paper called Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System. And that's a system that's option rich, right? They can do 3,000 and on-chord pulls per day. And that is as full of options as a highly modular system. In fact, it is a modular system. And so the question was to Dr. Baldwin was how can you teach us how to spot option value and how to measure it? And I learned about this amazing formula that changed my life. It's NK divided by T and sigma. So N is the number of modules you have. K is the number of parallel experiments you can do in a module. T is the amount of time it takes to perform an experiment. And sigma describes the shape of the uncertainty and risk reward. So what it says is that the option value is the number of modules you have times the number of parallel experiments you can perform divided by the duration of an experiment. And so you want N to be as high as you can to be. K is you want to do as many parallel experiments as you can, and you want the experiments to be able to be short. And so in the Amazon example in the early 2000s, they went from having one monolithic system that with 3,000 engineers, where N was 1, K was 1, and T was, in order to do an experiment, you probably had to change the whole system, so it was like a year. So they went from N to 1 to 10 to 100 to thousands. K went to say 100, right? Let's say 10, and then T goes from 365 days to 1 day. You've now unlocked 3-4 orders of magnitude more option value, which is enough to, as she said, blow an entire industry apart, right? AWS was one byproduct of that option value, and so I'm hoping that this formula kind of confirms this deeply held intuition that you have. It's like when in general there's an ability to partition systems, right? We take it because it allows us to make experiments independently and change things independently, which creates a whole bunch of option value.
Yeah, that's way better than I usually put it. But the way I think of it similarly, just in kind of the context of app development and getting yourself options to be able to make decisions in those boundaries that are appropriate, because not everything's created equal.
Exactly. Can I add one more? I forgot sigma. So when sigma is 1, it means we already know everything. There's no uncertainty. So in that case, we don't need a lot of option value because if we know what the answer is, we always pick the right answer. But when sigma is high, when you have like a lot of competitive pressure, when the answers are not known, and like with AI, right, we just don't know where the peaks and valleys are. We don't know how the high mountain is. That's high sigma. And so the more uncertainty you have, the more you need option value. Does that resonate with you?
100%. That's awesome. Yeah. I appreciate you doing this. I'll leave it on that because that was my favorite part of this. I guess any closing thoughts? I know I'll obviously link to the book because I can't wait for it to come out, and I'm really excited for it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The Vibe Coding book comes out late summer, early fall, and I have to end by saying I've had so much fun. I've got to work on so many interesting things. I got to work on the state of DevOps research, and all of that is kind of pales in comparison into how much fun I'm having right now. There's never been a better time to be a developer, and I'm hoping that everybody embraces AI as a way to bring more FAFO into the life faster, ambitious, alone, or more autonomous, fun, and create lots of option value.
Yeah, nice. Perfect. Thanks.
Thank you.
That last part, you just blew my mind. Thanks to Gene for doing the interview with me. Special thanks to Richard Campbell for actually organizing it, inviting me to Microsoft Build, and of course, Microsoft for having me. Thanks.